It's the greatest honor and privilege to introduce Hart Hasten here in Yerushalayim. And Hart, you have written this most incredible book, I Shall Not Die. I think it should be in every Jewish home. I think it is the most amazing book. What Rabbi Riskin writes about the book, it's like a modern day Haggadah, possibly, because you...
Actually, you probably noticed who...
You have Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel, yeah. He says, I am going to write something that will... because I thought first that he should be writing a foreword or something like that. He says, no, I want to do something even better than that, and that's what he wrote. He was a good friend, and we had him as a scholar several times in Indiana University, Jewish Studies program, where I told you that Alvin Rosenfeld established the Jewish Studies program, and now he teaches the Holocaust studies. You should really meet him. He's a great professor, wonderful. And he wrote already maybe as many as 30 books on the Shoah, on the Holocaust. So, ask me questions.
Okay, in your preface, you write your earliest memories, your earliest conscious memories. Can you just tell us, because it is so profound, about your cousin and your first cousin and your Zayda?
And my Zayda, yeah. And as I told you, the date is the Shmini Atzeret, on the date that he was shot by a Nazi in the center of our small shtetl in Poland.
What was the name of the shtetl?
In Polish, and now it's the Ukraine, it's Bohorodchane. Bohorodchane, and Yiddish is Brochny. And it's close to, you probably heard of, my dad used to call him Shimon Wiesenthal.
Yeah.
Simon Wiesenthal.
Who you also knew?
He was close to our city, to our town. He is born in Buchach, and our town is about 25, 30 miles from Buchach. And after the war, when we were in a DP camp, he used to come and visit us, because... And then when... Rabbi Heyer, you heard of Rabbi Heyer? Well, he established we are also founders of the
Museum of Tolerance.
Museum of Tolerance, and he's the one that's building it here in Jerusalem, and it's almost finished. So he came. We had a fundraiser for it in Indianapolis, where I live, and of course he remembers me. I was still a teenager in a DP camp, and he lived and that DP camp was near Linz, Austria, and he lived in Vienna. So he used to come visit. My dad used to refer to him as Engineer Wiesenthal. Actually, he was an architect, but in Poland you actually called an architect an engineer, which I never knew that. But later I always wondered, why did he call him Engineer Wiesenthal? That's how it was done in Poland. Anyway, these are some of the little stories.
But Hart, your father had like a nevuah. He had a vision that he had to leave. He knew that the Germans were coming in, and he felt he had to leave.
Yeah, I mention it to my family. Like yesterday, we had a big family of almost 30 people. We are now 2/3 of them live in Israel. Only 1/3 live in Chicago. So I usually tell them, I often wonder about that. Why is it he was the only one in the shtetl that decided to leave, not to stay for the Nazis? and he had to give my mother an ultimatum. She didn't want to leave, and she used to say, his name was Dov Berish, that was his Yiddish name. So she said, Berish, do you see anybody leaving? and he said, no, but we have to leave. And she says, no, I'm not leaving. But until the last minute, on June 28, 1941, 11 o'clock at night, she finally says, okay, he had a horse and buggy ready. He says, we have to go, because the Nazis were already 20 miles from our shtetl. In fact, they entered 3 days later, on July 1st. We left on the 28th of June, and July 1st, the Nazis were there, and we were already away, about 20 miles away. And so I tell my family, the only thing I can think of why my dad says, we are not staying, we're going to leave. Because we were the only survivors. When we returned, not one soul survived, not one. And we're talking about a big family. There are 8 on one side, on mother's side, and 9 children on his side. So I'm talking about as many as 100 souls, and none of them survived. Only we did. And actually, he also, our neighbor came in, and he had 4 boys and 3 girls, and they are older than we were. I was 10, and my brother was 15. And he said, I see that you're leaving. And he said, yes, would you please take my 4 boys? One is 18, the other one is 20, 22, and 24. Long story, they all survived. And Kazakstan, where we were. So I often think about that, even to this day. So I came up with an idea. And my rabbi loves this, because I say, not only, they usually ask me, survivors usually do not believe in God. Said, what happened in Auschwitz, what happened, there's no God.
I've met many that actually do. They still are very strong in their...
Yes, I do. I mean, I know that, and like Elie Wiesel, for instance, is a believer. But in the DP camps where we were, and when you meet the survivors, they said, no, we don't believe. That the majority did not believe when they came out. Maybe later on they realized that the Judaism still has to be alive. Fackenheim, I don't know, you probably heard the name, the philosopher. He used to say, the 11th commandment is that you don't want to give Hitler a posthumous victory. That's what he used to say. Because if you're doing that, and your children are no longer Jewish, and your grandchildren are not Jewish, and he used to say, you must not give him a posthumous victory. But the main thing, what I came up with is, because not only do I believe in God, I believe in miracles. My being alive today at 90, I'm 90 years old. In April I was 90. And so not only do I believe in miracles, and I believe in angels. And I tell my children and grandchildren, and now we have great-grandchildren, an angel must have whispered in my dad's ear. And I quote from Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha me'artzecha, mimoladetecha, u'mibet avicha. Leave the land where you were born and your father's home. And this must have happened, because otherwise, why would he leave and nobody else? And I think that was an angel that said, Lech lecha, you gotta go. And we are the only ones who survived. And as far as that goes, I am now the only one of the 8 people that wound up in Kazakhstan who's still alive. Nobody. So my brother died last year. Or was it? Wait about one. Maybe it was
just every year.
This year.
Every year.
Yeah. No, it's been a year. He's got a mitzvah already. I went to visit the mitzvah. He's buried in Ra'anana.
And Hart, can I just ask you? I know it's hard, but you were very close with your cousin Lonka.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit what happened?
It's amazing. I go back, I remember when I was 4 years old, and he was exactly my age, and people felt that we were twins, because the 2 sisters, my mother and his mother's name was Dina, my mother's name was Chana, 2 sisters, and as I said, we are exactly the same age, and we were always together. And from the year that I do remember is 4 years, and we would speak Polish, you know, it was in Poland, and also Yiddish, you know. And he would call me Lala. Lala means doll in English, in Polish, Lala. And I called him Lala. That's how we do it. Lala, Lala. And we are inseparable. And we loved each other, and we were together most of the time. And my Zaidi used to take each one of us by the hand, and I think I write about that. So had I been there, I would have been, and I was already 10 years old when we escaped, you know, because I was born in 31, and as I tell my friends, the war broke out on September 1st, 1939, so I was 8 years old. And then the Russians came. This was called the Ribbentrop-Molotov Agreement, and we were under the Soviets. And so at the age of 10, and of course we both to Cheder together, and in shul we went together always. With Zaidi, would take each one of us by the hand. And had I been there, I would have, you know. So my Zaidi was actually the first. He was the first victim as a Jew, and now I found out just recently that it was on Shmini Atzeret that the Nazis wanted him to be in the Judenrat, and he said, "No, I'm not going to cooperate with you." That's why they took him out in the square, and the Nazi, because this was confirmed with people that witnessed it, and Simon Wiesenthal knew the story. You want to move from here?
Okay. And then he was in the square.
Yes, in the square, and he said, "This is what happens to a Jew that doesn't obey our orders, you know. We want him to be in the Judenrat, and he doesn't want to do it." So took out the gun and he shot him, and my cousin started screaming, so he shot him too. So he shot them both. They were witnesses that described it to us.
And if your father wouldn't have left,
yes,
you would have also been with your Zaidi at that
absolutely.
time.
And there's no question in my mind. Yeah. And So we went on a horse and buggy and through the Ukraine, you know. I meet Russian Jews and they talk about mostly from the Ukraine, you know, Kiev. I was there. Oh yeah? When were you there? When I was 10 years old in 1941. And so we went through all and I remember the cities, and that's why I decided to write about it. And I was in Kiev and Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and Vizhnitsa and all those towns that we went through. And then finally, I think it was in Voronezh that we finally got on a train, and we didn't know where we were going except east. Wound up in Kazakhstan, and the train stopped, and Dad says, "We're getting off here." Didn't know. Stanция Alga, Ключевой район, Aktyubinskaya Oblast. And I remember even to this day, I still remember that. The names of where we stayed. And we stayed there for the same place, 4.5 years, until 1945. And then it was hard to get out, you know. The NKVD used to come and visit with my dad and said, "Why aren't you a Soviet citizen? You live here, you've been here 4 years now, why not?" He said, "No." He said,
in Alga?
Well, Stancja Alga, yeah, Alga. And he used to say, "No, I'm Polish. I'm not Russian. I'm Polish, and we want to go back to Poland," which we did. It took us several months, you know, to get out, to get back. And he also had to bribe the conductor of the train to make a stop at Stancja Alga. You know, he had to go back about 50 kilometers. And then we were waiting for him 4 o'clock in the morning, you know. And we see Dad, the train stopped, and he had to bribe him, and they stopped, and we got on. My brother was already gone. He was drafted, and first in the Russian army, and then switched to the Polish army. You know this from his book, right?
Yeah, and Hart, can I just ask, your father wouldn't let you go to school? He didn't want you to go to the Russian school?
That's correct. Yeah, and that was a mistake. And to this day, you know, and I used to tell him, "Why didn't you let me?" And I learned Russian, and I used to read books in Russian. I used to read Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and even Shakespeare in Russian. I could read it. I could read and write by myself, self-taught, but not in school, he says. Because at that time, this was a terrible time. In school, they used to ask him, you know, what does mother or father say to you about the Soviet, about Stalin, you know?
He was afraid. That were informers.
Yeah. And he said, "You're not going to this kind of a school here." And this is...
but it must be very hard.
But I miss it. I even say to this day, I'm trying to catch up, you know. I lost so many years. Even after the war, there were mediocre schools in the DP camps, and I never, as I said, to this day, I feel that I miss so much, and but I caught up, you know, much. But in my own mind, I think I lost 4.5 years of no school at all, except what my mom and dad taught me at home.
And did you ever go back to your shtetl, or did you go?
Yes, I did. I never wanted to go back. But it was actually Simon Wiesenthal that wrote, and he told us. He knew the shtetl because I told you he was born very close to us. He was in Buchach, we were in Brochin. Bechuch, they say in Yiddish, Bechuch or Buchach. Borochane, Brochin, that's our. So he said that in 1942, and even the date, I think it was July 16th, Ukrainian police picked up the rest of the Jews, about 1,200, I think, I'm not sure, 1,200, and they marched them to Stanislav, which is now Ivano-Frankivsk, and they took him to Rudolph's mill, and they slaughtered him. And when I read that, I said, I'd like to find, they must have been buried somewhere, and we found out there was one survivor who was in the Russian army, and we met him, and he said he recognized me. He called me by my name. They used to call me Heche, from Herzl, Heche. He said, I remember you and Munja, your brother. Yeah. And he said, this is what happened. He knew what happened, how they were slaughtered by the Ukrainian, and he knows where they are buried. So they took him to the cemetery in Ivano-Frankivsk. And sure enough, we met the rabbi there, who's still there now, Viktor Kolesnik, rabbi.
Is there a memorial? Did they put up a
We
memorial?
put it up. There was nothing there.
There was nothing.
You could just see that. You can see there is a mass grave. You can actually see it, but there was nothing on it. But the Kolesnik knew about it. So this was in 1993 when I took my wife and my 17-year-old son, Josh, who lives here now in Gush Etzion, and we went to the cemetery and we found the mass grave. And I imagine that my family is buried there too. I think so. And so we put up a monument. We put up a beautiful monument. It's not in this book.
Here's a picture of your parents, your dear parents.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful picture. And your mother lived till over 100.
Yeah, 102. Yeah, yes. Dad was ill when we got out of the Soviet Union.
But after you got out of the Soviet Union,
and I know why too.
Hart, can I ask
bread was rationed.
You were always hungry.
Through the 4.5 years.
You were always very hungry.
Yes, I was always hungry, and I don't remember ever in the Soviet Union that I went to bed on a full stomach. And I used to ask him, Tatu, we used to call him Tatu, are we ever going to have enough bread? Yes, my son, I'm telling you, we will be okay. Yeah, he never lost hope. Yeah. I usually tell my friends when I came to the United States in 1951, we were 5.5 years we were in the DP camps. We came legally to the United States.
Before, can I just ask, Hart, before you went to the DP camps, did you go back to Lvov?
Yes, we went back to Lvov, and then they told us, don't go back to Brochin because the Ukrainians will kill you. So we never went back to Borochan, never.
You never went?
No, except in 1993. I went back. And not even a cemetery. There was nothing left. Our whole house was destroyed. They built a post office on our property. But I figured where it was because I figured that the church was next, close to it, and I said when I stood here, I could see the church. And sure enough, I said there was a place that looked like a doghouse, and I told my wife and my young son, 17 years old at the time, this was our well right here. And I said, I'm sure of that. But now it's a post office.
And Hart, when you went to the Soviet, when you escaped and you went to the Soviet Union, your mother kept kosher all the time.
All the time. Never touched anything.
It's incredible. Even pikuach nefesh.
I remember the first time, when he picked up a salami, and I looked at my dad and I says, "Dad, this is treif." He looked at me and he says, "Eat." And then when I tasted it, I said, "It tastes good." It was funny, but and the reason why, because he saw I must have been very, lost a lot of weight on the road, because we didn't have enough food, and just a loaf of bread was wow, and my mother used to divide it up because we had four young men that we rescued, our neighbors, and so we met two of them in Israel. They all survived. Two of them made it all the way to Israel, and Beersheba, we went to meet them, and this was a reunion unbelievable. They cried for 2 hours. They couldn't talk, and one of them said, "I would have recognized you." This was like 50 years later,
But your mother always gave equal portions. She never gave her own children more.
So they actually told us she used to divide it up, and she never gave her own 2 boys more than she gave the other 4. She said, "Your mother was a tzedekis." Yeah, she was. She really was. No, she never touched anything that wasn't kosher. In fact, there was even in Kazakstan, there's one gentleman that said he was a shoichet. But she saw him come out one time from an eatery, the restaurants, they didn't have any much anyway, but he came out of there, and she said, "This is the shoichet." I wouldn't touch anything that, she never touched any meat. Because there was no kosher meat. Yeah, that's the story.
And
what else do you have?
Hart, this is a picture of you and your parents and your brother Mark and his wife, and you helped make the shidduch of your brother.
Yes. So you really went into
No, we went to, but it's amazing. Your brother came here.
Yeah.
He was on the Altalina.
He was on the Altalina. And then Ben Gurion didn't help him with a job even. He wrote us, and we were still in Austria. He says, "I don't think I can make a living here." So he said, "I'm coming back." And in the meantime, we left for the States. And when he came back to Austria, we were already gone. So he made it to Canada.
He was in Montreal.
Yeah, and then I met this wonderful lady who's still alive today, Anna Ruth. That's his wife. I told her, I says, I just started. Anyway, I says, "You ought to meet my brother," and they eloped. When she went to visit him, and then we got a letter from them that said we are married.
And you once, when you met Menachem Begin for the first time.
Yes, and the
I think it was 1970.
1969 in Chicago, yeah.
And you told him that you were a survivor.
Beitari. I was in Beitar. And I also was at first, when we were in Poland, not in our place. So we were in Włocławek, it's called, Włocławek. You know who came from Włocławek? It was Yaakov Meridor.
Meridor.
Yeah. And so we were there almost a year, and then we crossed the border into Czechoslovakia from Austria, and then on. Czechoslovakia, and then on to Austria. Yeah. So what was
You
what was
you used to have posters of revisionists and DP camps.
So in Poland there were just a few survivors from the concentration camps, and there was a Shomer HaTzair, and I didn't know the difference between Shomer HaTzair or anything else, except I didn't like. So I joined the Shomer HaTzair, and by the way, Begin himself at one time was in Shomer HaTzair. Did you know that?
I didn't know.
Yeah. In his biography, in biography, he talks about that. So we have that in common too. We have so much in common. And so he was a Shomer HaTzair, and then they talked about a binational state, and I was already 15 years old. And I said, it's time the Jews have their own state. What's this binational state? I didn't like that. So in the DP camp in Poland, there was no other party, no other organizations than the Shomer HaTzair. So in the DP camp, there was Beitar, and I joined the Beitar. And then I heard for the first time the name Begin, and I was only 15 or 16 years old. And I says, oh my gosh, I love this man, I think a proud Jew, and he whipped the British, and if they whipped our boys, as he used to say, we'll whip you. And even kill them, because they hanged so many of our people. So I said, this is my person, my man. And then I met him in the flesh, and we lived in Indianapolis, and I heard that he was going to be in Chicago in 1969. And I said, I must meet him. And that's where we met. And he was even more admirable to me, because the way when he heard that I was in a Beitar and a DP camp, he said, I want to talk to you. I will see you at that table. I'll meet you. They were all shaking hands. He gave a speech. He spoke for Israel Bonds, and then he came over, and we just hit it off right there. And he asked questions, and this is why I say he had a photographic memory, because as we were sitting and talking, there were some Israelis came over, wanted to shake hands with Menachem Begin, and he says, I remember even the word he said, Chaverim, or something. He said, you must meet this man. His name is Hart Hasten. Do you know what he went through in the Soviet Union, where he survived? And he's telling him exactly what I told him. He remembered everything. And I said, oh my, this man is a genius, and I'm to this day, I'm writing another book, because there's so many stories that I have to publish it, because there's some that nobody ever heard of the stories, And I have so many of them, and if you ask me specifically, I'll be happy to tell you.
So here we have a picture with you. It's amazing, because you developed, possibly after just reading and speaking, I think one of the closest, you were possibly one of the very closest, you and your wife, closest friends to Menachem Begin and Lisa.
I really believe that,
When Elisa was Nifta, they wanted you to accompany.
Yes.
Menachem Begin was in America, and you accompanied him back to.
Yes, and of course we worked hard to raise money, so there was a lot of money. The party, the Herut party, was in debt, because Ben Gurion, those who fell, who were killed, and when they were in Irgun, Ben-Gurion was very, very verbissen, you know.
It's the whole Labour Party.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember one time, Yechiel Kadeshai, does that ring a bell?
Sure.
Menachem Begin's.
He was his right-hand man.
Yes. He was our best friend, you know. And they would always get together, like when we were here, we were always together, and they stayed with us in the hotel. So once on a panel, on a Pesach, we were together, and there was a panel, and so they asked him, Mr. Kadeshai, what do you think of Ben-Gurion? He said, a murderer, because he was on that ship too. Kadeshai met his wife on that ship, Bambi. So, and he married.
On Alta, wow.
They were on the Altalena too, yes.
But Hart, what was amazing is that you had like a nevuah, a prophecy. You introduced Menachem Begin before he won the election in '77 as the future Prime Minister of Israel.
Always.
And this is before. And Menachem Begin even said that you believed before I believed that I'd be the Prime Minister.
No, that's true. And Yechiel Kadeshai actually wrote about it. And
how did you know that he would be the Prime Minister?
Because I met the others too. I met those he ran against, and I says, they are not even close to be compared to the intellect of Menachem Begin. I always knew that because I got to know. I met Rabin in Paris many times, because they used to come to speak, you know, in the United States, and I used to meet him. And I said, this man should be Prime Minister. And then he actually said it. You believed in me more than I did. And Kadeshai the same way. He was interviewed. He said, there's only one guy that said he'll be Prime Minister. That's Hart, the businessman from Indianapolis, you know, Hart Hasten. He said he's going to be. And I told Simona a night before, the elections were the next day, and I says, Simona, tomorrow he is going to be Prime Minister. And sure enough, he did.
This is a picture with you and Menachem Begin and your wife Simona with Menachem Begin and his daughter. And Hart, what is amazing is that it is quite amazing because Menachem Begin connected very closely with the Sephardim.
Sephardim, absolutely.
He had such a heart. Yeah. He had a heart for Am Yisrael, and I think you saw that. You recognized it.
Yes, and also the Ethiopian Jews. He's the one that rescued them. You know, and I know he talked about it a lot. You know, he used to talk about that. He said our pilots used to go out and there were no runways, and they used to come in, and usually at night to pick up the Ethiopian, and he always believed that they're Jewish. You know, there were the rabbis didn't think they're Jewish, but he believed they're Jews.
But Yosef, the Sephardi chief rabbi, yes. he actually paskin that they were Jewish.
That's right. And he just loved Jews and loved everybody, and he used to say of himself, Ani Yehudi Pashut, you know. He wasn't Pashut.
And he was
in my mind, you know, he was.
You invited him to be the Sunday at your son's bris.
Yeah, it so happened he was in the United States, and he was in touch with us, and I says, Mar Begin, you would give us a lot of honor and pleasure if you would come. Absolutely, and he came to Indianapolis a year before he became prime minister. And then, and something historical happened. And I'm not sure whether I wrote about this or not. That when he was in Indianapolis, he got a call. In fact, that's the first time I heard about the name Kadeshai. Kadeshai was in Tel Aviv actually, and he says. The telephone rang. That was right after the Brit Milah, and he said, my name is Yechiel Kadeshai, and I need to speak to Menachem Begin. I said, sure. I gave Menachem Begin receiver. He talked to him, and then when he was through talking to him, he said to me, Hart, I was planning to go to Los Angeles from here. I just changed my mind. Yechiel advises me to come back. There's already discussions about the next election, and he says I ought to be in Jerusalem, not in Los Angeles. And he turned around, and this was a historic thing, that he changed his itinerary, and he went back to Jerusalem, and a year later he was the prime minister.
Here's a picture you have such beautiful pictures, but with Menachem Begin and with Simona and his godson, your son Josh. And I think this picture here, which was at the Chagall Hall in the Knesset.
Oh yes.
You
in fact,
gave you introduced Menachem Begin at his last talk, his last address that he ever gave.
Exactly. And you mentioned Harry Hurwitz. He writes about the last speech that he made, but he doesn't mention that I was the one that introduced him, And I told him later, why couldn't you say that, anyway, there were 400 delegates from all over the world that came. This was a Israel Bond delegation that came, and as always, they always asked me to introduce him. And before even, they used to ask him to introduce him before he was prime minister. So I introduced him many times, and one time he got upset with me. And I don't know, I think I may have mentioned in the book.
You did, you called him my idol.
Yes, I said, I always say he's my hero, he's my teacher, my role model, and all of these things. And one time I said, he's my idol. And he didn't say anything at the time, but after he came over, he says, you worship idols? He said to me. He said, don't you ever ask, say that I'm your idol. I'm not your idol. And another time when he was in seclusion, he didn't want to see anybody, didn't want to do anything, and I came up with an idea. You're going to ask him? Okay.
You can.
They're okay. They're quiet.
Can continue.
So at that time, he didn't want to talk to the press, and Shamir was running, and everybody wanted him to say something, so he can win the election, No, he didn't want to talk. So I came up with an idea. I know, Mar Begin, I know why you don't want to say anything. Why? Why, what do you think? And I said, you must have taken a nader. You must have.
Wow.
Did I mention this in the book? Yeah. I said, you must have taken it. Otherwise, there was no reason for you not to say something. Ooh, did he get mad? Do you know what a nader is? He said to me. Yeah, I know what a nader is. Do you think I would do such a thing? I'd never do such a thing. And don't you ever mention that I took a nader. However, I didn't give in. I said, there's no good rationale for you not to say anything. And then about a half an hour later, a reporter called from Paris, He wanted to talk to Menachem Begin. He picked up the phone. And then I hear him say that, what kind of a stupid question is that? Do I support Shamir? Of course I do. What do you think? He actually answered the question.
Wow.
So it must have, he must have taken it seriously when I told him. I said, you still think you're in Siberia, and you're alone, and I said, there's no reason for you not to say something, and he did. So So, but we had most of the time, such a great time because first we understood each other in many languages. He would sometimes say something in Polish, or on Yiddish, on Russian, and so there's so many stories. Since you mentioned his last speech, it was also his 70th birthday. And he would always talk about when he's 70, he's going to retire. But the media made it out that he was so depressed. His wife passed away, and of course we were in the room when we told him the news. Also, actually, you should know that it was Dr. Glassman. He is from South Africa, I think.
But they asked you and Simona to break the news.
Yeah, to be in the room. Benny, the son, says, because he traveled with his daughter, Leah. In fact, today, Simona, my wife, is with Leah today in Tel Aviv, because they're very close, and so this is something a little funny, which I'm going to tell you. So I had the great honor and privilege the zchut to introduce him at the Chagall Hall, and we also celebrated his 70th birthday. So everything went beautifully. And the next day, that was his very last speech, which we didn't know. It was his public speech. So the next day, I went in to see. I'm not sure whether Simona was with me or not. We probably was. The two of us said we're going to say goodbye. We were not leaving that day, but we wanted to congratulate him again on his 70th birthday. So he's the one that brought it up. He said, "Hart, you can see. Oh, well, thank you for the introduction." He said, "You overdid it, but it came from the heart," he said. "So I'll accept it." Okay. Then he said, "You see, I'm 70 and I'm getting old." That was a little bit of a hint that he was going to retire, which didn't even enter my mind. I did not understand it that way at all. He just said, "Look, I'm old, I'm 70. And I said, "Marbegin, what are you talking about? 70 is not old at all." I said, "Ronald Reagan is 70.
He was about 74.
And he is getting ready to run for another term." And so he looked at me and says, "Yeah, Reagan, a gesunder Goy." And okay, so a few weeks later, when he retired, when he decided to resign, I had particularly the editor in Indianapolis of the Jewish Post and Opinion, Gabe, called me. He says, you claim you're a friend of Menachem Begin, and he didn't tell you that he was going to retire and he's going to resign? Didn't he say something to you?" And I says, "Actually, he never mentioned that, but come to think of it, though, I remember what when he said that he was old, 70, and he did say something about he's getting old. So he gave me a hint at something, but I never understood it that way. So what did he say? So what did you say?" And I said, "I told him about Reagan. He said he's 74, he's 4 years older, and he's getting ready to run again." And so what did he say? And I said, instead of saying a gesunder Goy, I said, well, he said something that Reagan is a robust individual. That was because otherwise he would write, then I would get into trouble. I always be careful with the media, like you right now. You didn't tell me I was going to be
you're such a natural. It's so precious.
So anyway, these are some of and so many other which always bothered me, the way the media handled him, the way they called him names, and I took it personally, and I remember.
Hart, if you speak to, I think everyone that I've spoken to, they recognize that Menachem Begin was one of the most beloved and the most genuine prime ministers, that he lived so frugally. He had one suit. Yeah. You wanted to even buy him a suit and he wouldn't even accept. And he lived so modestly.
I write about that.
But he was so beloved by everyone. And even from the right and the left. And
just yesterday, I told you we had the whole family here. And I always mention Menachem Begin if I'm with the family, I always, among all the other personal things that we talk about, and they look at me now, I'm 90 years old, and I always tell them, I'm not very smart, but I have a lot of experience, and I am 90 years old. So I always mention, I said, Menachem Begin, he was my hero and my role model, and I actually modeled my life after him. I really did, as far as honesty, integrity, and he really was my role model. And I always, even yesterday, I mentioned to my family. His nobility, he's so noble. The way he treated his wife, for instance. He would always, whenever she is with him, and she most of the time was with him when he gave speeches, she always used to say to me, he says, I'm going to sit on this side, let him, and you sit on the other side, because he says people come over and they want to talk in this way, because he would always get up, always. He wouldn't just somebody talking to him and he would be sitting. No, he would stand up. And she says, let's try to save him. So I would do that. So I was going to mention about, so he would always introduce her, and this was the introduction, and you probably heard it too. He would always say, and here's my wife, and then he would say it in Hebrew, and I'll always remember that. Zacharti lach chesed ne'orayich, ahavat kelulotayich, lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz, and he would change it because he quoted from Yirmiyahu. So he would say, in Yirmiyahu he says, lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz lo ziru'ah. And he would say, he would just change that, Lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz zru'at mokshim. Do you know what that means? Sowing with mines. You followed me in the desert, in the wilderness, to the land that was sown with mines. And he always introduced it that way. And then, if it was in English that he spoke, he would interpret it, I remember you, the kindness of your youth, and the love of your bridal days, Klulotai. It's beautiful, Again, the way he not only appreciated, but showed the respect, which is so much different from the others. That's why you asked me why he's different. Because did you ever see, even in Ben Gurion, would he ever introduce his wife, or did Peretz introduce his wife, or Rabin? No, they may be there, but they would never introduce her. He would always, if she is there, he would introduce her. Zachar Tirach, and even I remember it by heart, because it made an impression. So he is such a noble person, And this Faradim, like you mentioned, is definitely, they were crazy about it, even to this day.
To this very day. To this very day,
yeah.
the flags, and it's got the picture of Menachem Begin on the Israeli flag.
Yes.
You can go in the shuk and you'll see it.
I always go to the Begin Center. In fact, tomorrow I have a meeting with Hertzi, he's the follower of Harry Hurwitz. So I'm meeting him tomorrow. So when I take a taxi, he says, take me to the Begin Center. Oh, yeah. And then my wife, when she's with me, she would say, you know, my husband, he's a friend of ours. You know, really? Yeah. The one time when I came, I was by myself without my wife, and Yechiel called me. He says, Menachem wants to see you now. It was early in the morning. And I said, sure, I know why. I used to bring him books. He loved history books and also biographies, you know, of famous people. And I would bring him sometimes 24 books. So he wanted to, and he used to finish a book a day. And then he says, he wants to discuss with me the book. And I says, Mar Begin, I haven't read this book. I don't know anything about it. So I take a taxi. And I didn't want to tell him, take me to Tzemach number 1, where he was, his residence at that time. And I would say, take me to Yefenov, and I'll show you where to drop me off. Very smart taxi drivers. So I'm sitting in the back, and he's driving. He turned his head. Are you by any chance going to see Menachem Begin? And I say, as a matter of fact, what am I going to lie to him? Yes, I'm going to see Menachem. Really? You are going to see Menachem Begin? Yes. Will you take a message from me? You know how I miss this man? I haven't heard his voice now. He wasn't retired. He was already in seclusion. And he said, I miss him so much, and I love him so much. Do you know how much I love him? And I'm supposed to ask him, how much do you love him? I love him more than my wife.
Wow.
Did I write about that?
You did.
I did write about it, yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's a true story. So, of course, it was funny to me. And so as soon as I got off, he drops me off on Tzemach. I go in. Begin gets up, he gives me a hug. How was it? Or did you come? Which airline? Did you come on El Ali? Yes, I came on El Ali. Oh, you probably traveled first class, right? No, I came business class. He said, in Poland, when I was the head of Beitar, not only in Poland, but in Czechoslovakia too. He was both countries. He said he was the head. I used to travel third class. Do you know why? No, why? Because there's no fourth class, you know. I mean, with the true sense of humor. And then I read the paper. Oh, Menachem Begin is so depressed. And even to this day, Simona will not. On CNN, there's Wolf Blitzer.
Yeah.
You know. She hates him so.
He gave a wrong report saying that.
Absolutely. You actually heard him too?
And you write it in your book as well. That he wrote that he was in depression. And,
he lives by himself.
Like a hermit.
And in a room, in a bedroom, there's no window. And Simona, my wife, was so upset with that. She says, has he been there? I was there. There, the window. Yeah, the beautiful balcony. His daughter lives with him. He's got a woman that used to...
Benny Begin
used to cook and clean and everything. He says, why? This is fake news, you know. This is fake news. You make up stories that are absolutely not true.
How do you know that Menachem Begin's book was read by Nelson Mandela when he was in prison in Robben Island?
I didn't know that.
And he always would comment that it gave him such inspiration when he read Menachem Begin's book.
Well, he wrote 2 books. The one that's really good literature is White Nights.
The White Nights,
That's a terrific book. We actually I mentioned it once to him. He took us upstairs. Usually this is the residence of the prime minister, okay, but we weren't sitting like, we are part of the family. We'd go up and sit with him, and we were talking about his book. It was the new edition, where the interrogations by the NKVD at that time actually matched what he wrote about it.
They found the transcripts.
Exactly. So I told him, I says, at that time we didn't even know that this is even before they actually found the original interrogation. And so I said, Marbegin, I enjoyed this book so much because to me it was good literature. And he looked at me and says, Allah tells me the same thing. We called her Allah, not Eliza, Allah. It was so anyway, it was.
And Hart, can I just ask you, after everything you've been through, and you really have, like what Rabbi Riskin wrote there, it's like a modern Haggadah. You saw the suffering, you saw coming from Poland, going to Kazakstan, then back to Poland, to Lvov, and then to the DP camps in Austria, and then and then you went to America and come here. What message do you give to your children and to the future generations?
I just did it yesterday. I talked to them. I told them the following. Well, first of all, originally, I wanted to go to Israel. This was 1946 when we arrived in DP camp. We arrived to Lvov, as you mentioned, in 1945, And so we stayed there in Poland, Wrocławek, for about almost a year. In 46, we came to the DP camps. And after 5.5 years, we waited because we were on the Polish quota. We had to wait this long to come in. Right now, they come in through the illegally, and but we came in legally, and I tell my children and grandchildren, when I came to America on April the 10th, 1951, I was homeless, I was stateless, I was jobless, I was powerless, I was penniless, and usually when I say penniless, it isn't figuratively speaking.
It's real.
Yeah, I usually say not metaphorically speaking, but literally penniless and speechless. I couldn't speak the language. I couldn't speak English, but never hopeless. That's what I tell my children and grandchildren and my friends. That's how when I came to America. And America just gave me opportunities. I started a job at 80 cents an hour, and I worked for two Jewish exploiters. I mean, real exploiters. I worked so hard, they were going to give me a dime, but they never gave me the dime raise because I was a hard worker. I wanted to succeed. And then not only didn't they give me a dime, but they laid me off, because they didn't have enough work. So I had to leave and look for another job. A week later, they called me. So I was making about $30 a week, working so hard. A presser, women's coats. the two Barnett brothers, Jewish, because they could speak a little Yiddish, so I could communicate with them, because I couldn't speak English. So my dad says, "Who called you?" Well, we didn't have a phone, it was downstairs, I had to go, they called for me. I says, "They're calling me back to work." He said, "No, you're not going to work for these Oisnitzers, Oisnitzers in Yiddish, and exploiters." I says, "Dad, I'm the only breadwinner." He was ill, So I didn't want my mother to, she couldn't speak English at the time either. Although she learned later on, she spoke English well later. And so I had to go back and tell him I wasn't coming back to work. "Why not?" Says, "My dad tells me you didn't give me the dime you promised me, Okay, hung up. The next day they called again. I said, "I already told you I'm not coming back." "Don't worry about that. We will give you can make now $40 a week instead of 30. Oh, I go back to my dad. $40 a week, I'm going back to work. "No, you're not." So they called again. Every day for a week, they called. It went up to $75 a week. I was worth $75, and they paid me $30, 80 cents an hour. And my dad said, "What did I tell you?" "Yeah, but $75, I'm going." He said, "No, you're not. Even 50,000, this is what he used, the 50,000, you are not going back to work for these Oisnitzers." So I had to tell him no. And then I found a job, my second job in the United States, 90 cents an hour. I worked there for 14 years and worked myself up. In the meantime, I went to school, I went to college and all this. And I became the superintendent of the plant. And then they transferred me, this was all in Minneapolis, and they transferred me to Indianapolis. They forced me to help them out because they were losing money in the Indianapolis plant. So
you turned it around.
And I was already, so I became, and after a year and a half, I went into my own business, but I explained it to my children. Just yesterday, I mentioned that, and I used the word coerced. They coerced me to come to Indianapolis, coerced me, and I says, everybody these are now Israelis, they don't, most of them understood, but there are some that speak only Hebrew, they don't speak English. I says, explain it to them what coerce means. Okay. And so I do mention this, that we started from really penniless, speechless, and yet giving an opportunity. I love America, and I'm actually very patriotic, and I'm a good Republican, and Mike Pence is my buddy. We were very close, Mike Pence, and I would like for him to go for the gold. I urge him to do that, but he doesn't want to run against Trump. He doesn't want to do that. If Trump doesn't run, he would definitely throw in the, he would throw the hat in the ring. So that's some of the politics.
So I'll just mention with Mike Pence, there's Abin Naor. He's a Holocaust survivor that I met and I know. And I went to his home, and he goes back to Dachau. He goes back to Munich every year, and he has a very close connection with the German Chancellor and the President. When Mike Pence came to Dachau, he said he took him around and he was crying. Right? Prince was
Yes,
crying.
yes, I remember that. Yes, absolutely. He went to the cemetery.
And he was with Abka Abanar.
He is really a Chovev Tzion.
But he's a very close friend
He
of the
gives
Jewish
me,
people.
he tells him, I'm his mentor. He called me. He did it at APAC. There were 16,000 people there, and he gave a speech, and he mentions, he says, Hart Hasten is the one that made me love.
But Hart, you decided also, one of the most amazing things that, against all odds really, you decided that you need a Jewish day school, that teaches Jewish values.
This was a tough time in my
and you
life.
established that against all odds.
Yeah, that was really something.
You knew how important Jewish education was, and
they were in Indianapolis very assimilated. Like Menachem Begin once said, they were demonstrating, the Satmar were demonstrating at he was at the Waldorf Astoria, he was already prime minister, and they were down with Begin, with Israel, save Palestine and all that. And
it's a small group, the Torah Carter. It's part of, it's a small group.
I know. So one of the people with us, we came to get him, and usually they escort the president, a delegation goes. So they were screaming, you could hear them, and one of them apologized, one of the leaders that was going to escort him. And he says, sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, these are the Satmar, and they're non-Zionists, and they were out there demonstrating against you and all that. He said, oh, Begin says, that doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I want to tell you something. I guarantee you that their grandchildren will be Jewish. I'm not so sure about yours. He said that. And later I asked him, I says, how did you know that this man is actually intermarried and his grandchildren? I didn't know that. Had I known it, I would have never said that, He was absolutely right about that, but that's how he looked at it, He said, just because they demonstrate now, that doesn't mean that there'll be Zionists coming out of that group. And
there are. I actually have a patient who the father is actually very anti in the Torah Carter, and the son's very Zioni.
Yeah, he sensed that, Menachem Begin. And
I've actually seen it.
Yeah, and he said that, and he actually said that. He said, it doesn't bother me, they're demonstrating, but, but I used to bother me, and I used to go out and talk to them in Yiddish. And I said, now Ronim, geht daheim, was tut ihr? I used to tell them in Yiddish, because that's how they speak Yiddish, as you know. And I says, you fools, why are you demonstrating? You want to be without Israel? You don't want Israel? And their leadership is like that, and but Menachem Begin said, don't worry about it.
But Hart, you've always had a very close connection with Israel and Jewish values and Jewish education.
Absolutely.
And look, you have so much of your family live here.
That's
your
right. Two-thirds are here. Exactly.
And Mark's, your late brother's family also.
That's right. Exactly.
In fact, they're next door neighbors of mine.
Yes, like Michael, and of course he built a home and Bayit begun, and that's true. But about the school, this was so tough, and what actually gave me the impetus, because when I went to see the president of the federation, is that what you're referring to, probably?
It is the most incredible thing that you experienced.
And so he was a friend of mine, and we used to play tennis. I'm also involved in tennis. I played at the Maccabiah. Did you know that? You haven't gotten to that yet.
There was Dr. Foreman, who was also South African.
Yeah. And so this man, his name is Marty Larner, it's in the book, and he was the president, and I went in, this was 1971, and we needed a school. I wanted my children, I already had 2 kids at the time, I'm not a teacher, and I want them to learn Hebrew and to be turned on Zionism, and also that's the kind of school I wanted. And when I went to see him, so they picked me as the chairman of the ad hoc committee to start a day school, which I said I know nothing about day schools. And I'm not going to be your chairman, but they coerced me. And I said to Marty, you need to change something?
In 1 second.
Okay, I'll wait.
Oh, this is
because
amazing.
This is an interesting story, and what I'm going to tell you.
This is incredible. I know this. Okay, 1 minute. You went to see the prince. You went to see in the federation to ask if they could help.
So we used to play tennis with the president of the federation, and I wanted to give us. We didn't at the time. We didn't need financial support, and I just wanted their
maybe endorsement or
just talk about Jewish education, and he's the president. So I went to his he asked me to come to his office. Okay, so I did. And for 2 hours, he questioned us. We were interviewing at that time the principal of the school. I took him with me because I don't know enough about Jewish education. I know much more now, but at that time, very little. And so we were there together. And for 2 hours, he was drilling us. And finally, at the end, he said, I cannot support this. Not only can I not support it, I'm against it. I am going to speak out against it. We are, in the Jewish community, we are for public schools. And this is going to be a Jewish day school. What do they call them? The Catholic call it, what kind of a school? Anyway. We do not believe in this kind of education because it's going to be orthodox. I can see that, it's going to be orthodox, and they didn't like it. Actually, I says, I don't call it orthodox, it's traditional. We'll take the children from, didn't matter which branch of Judaism they come from, we'll never question them. They'll be attending the school.
I think you even approached the Reform and the Conservative rabbis.
Yes, absolutely, and they did enroll them later on. So I'm very much opposed to that. I was very disappointed, and he looked at my face, I guess. I showed it, and he says, well, Hart, I can tell you that I'm against it now, but I may be wrong and you may be right, because, in 1948, I was against the establishment of a Jewish state. And I couldn't believe it, what I was hearing. I says, would you repeat what you just said? You were against establishment of a state, of a Jewish state? Oh, yes, and I wasn't the only one, And that did something to me, I was thinking back, I was in a DP camp and we wanted to go to Israel and we wanted to fight for a Jewish state after the Holocaust. And my brother did go, he was older, I was too young, they wouldn't take me. And you were against a Jewish state? I jumped up and I told my friend, let's get out of here. There's nothing to talk about. And I turned to Marty and I says, I want to tell you something. Just because what you just said, you were wrong then and you are wrong now. The only difference is we're not going to wait 25 years. This has already been 25 years. The state of Israel has been already a state of Israel. And I says, not only are we going to start a school, we were going to start actually planning for a year later, preparing us. we are going to start this day school this year because of what you just said. And we walked out, and I said, let's get out of here. You know, I was so upset. Imagine a Jewish, so-called Jewish leader is against the establishment of a Jewish state after the Holocaust. Imagine. And I just could not. This was too much for me. And we did. We started at 1971. We were 50 years old this year.
50 years old?
50, yeah. 50 of, yes, a Jubilee year.
It's a Jubilee, it's a big...
Yeah.
And you won the Jerusalem Prize?
That's right, the Jerusalem Torah, for Torah education.
For excellence, I think.
And you know who was the president? Chaim Herzog. This the father of the present president, who is a friend of ours too, because he was our lawyer. Bougie was our lawyer in the 70s when we established a business here, cable television, and he was our lawyer, so we know him. And in fact, he sent me a beautiful email, and then I congratulated him to being president. In fact, I may see him tomorrow. So he's really a nice person. I'm glad that, and of course I knew his father. So we did receive the Jerusalem Prize for Torah education. Yes. Aren't you tired already?
No, so Hart, I just want to thank you.
Okay.
And I'm just going to come in. So it's just been the greatest honor. It's really good. So Hart, I cannot thank you enough. For me, it's been the greatest honor and privilege. And this book, I Shall Not Die, I think should be really in every Jewish home. And I just want to mention that, who I know very well, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin actually quotes Rav Kook, and he teaches that some hearts that are made of stone, and some stones, the stones of the kotel, which also have hearts. And you, Hart, Hasten, really, you have a heart of gold. You are somebody we should all strive to emulate. Your life and what you've done and achieved, and how you've touched so many people's lives and you've helped so many people. It is something extraordinary beyond belief. And you're positive, and what you went through, and you always kept your emunah, your faith.
Thank you.
And how you've, it's just been the greatest honor. And you should just have mazel bracha and meves shrim ready. And like it says here, it's like a modern day Passover story, that you went from the depths of the abyss to Baruch Hashem, that you've prospered and your family are here, and you miracles, modern day miracles.
There was a reason why Hashem saved us, and I always thought, what was the reason, you know? Because we can contribute something, particularly in the Jewish community and in the United States, which I worry about quite a bit, you know. They, like Menachem Begin said, you know, their children will be Jewish, but their grandchildren, and I'm worried about your grandchildren, whether they'll be Jewish. And he happened to be right about that. I want to sign it for you.
Thank you so much. And Hart, I just want to mention that I've had the great honor really to meet with quite a few survivors, many, and the one pages. But what's amazing is the majority of the survivors that I've met with remained they kept their emunah, which is actually quite unbelievable. And the other thing which is also amazing is that when I ask them what message do they impart, the vast majority say, thank God we've got the state of Israel. Thank God we've got our own place that every Jew can go to, and we don't have to rely on the world that let us down.
You know, Menachem Begin actually predicted there's going to be anti-Semitism eventually, because he didn't like the idea of Wiedergutmachung. You know what that means? German. The reparations that they were...
Yeah, he was against it.
He was against it. He was very much against it, and I happen to agree with it. Israel needed the economic help from Germany, it's true, and it was a tough time, you know, when Ben Gurion decided to do it. But this will bring on, he says, anti-Semitism. He worried about that. He really did. And now, and I always thought, I disagreed with him. I says, after the Holocaust, there'll be no longer anti-Semitism ever again. But that's not the case.
We see it, unfortunately.
That's
but
right.
there's a difference. We've got our own country, Baruch Hashem.
That's right. And when I see, in fact, many of our grandchildren serve now. One actually made it as a captain in the Israeli army, a grandson. He's terrific. And we have a granddaughter right now. She was just drafted. In fact, she already had a uniform, and we had several of them that all served. All our grandchildren served in the army.
So my eldest daughter became an officer. She was in Hebron and she became an officer.
Yeah.
And my other daughter did Sherut Leumi. So I couldn't agree with you more, Hart. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes.